Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something before we even begin. How many great ideas have you had this year? Not 5, not 10, probably hundreds. A better way to run your business, a leaner way to run your life, a conversation you knew you needed to have, a habit you knew you needed to break. And how many of them did you actually act on? See, that's the gap right there. That's the whole game. Because success isn't reserved for the people with the best ideas. It's reserved for the people who move on the ideas they already have. I've met brilliant people who are broke, and I've met simple people who are wealthy. The difference was never the quality of the thought. It was the speed of the action. Here's what I've learned after all these years. Thinking feels like progress. It feels productive. You get to sit there, turn the idea over in your hands, polish it, plan it, protect it from ever having to face the real world, and call that preparation. But most of the time, it's just fear wearing a suit and tie. Somebody once told me, give me a good plan, violently executed today, and I'll take it over a perfect plan tomorrow. And I never forgot that, because the marketplace, the mountain, the goal, none of them care how thorough your thinking was. They only respond to your feet moving. So tonight, I'm not here to give you one more idea to think about. You've got plenty of those already, gathering dust. I'm here to talk about the 6 most dangerous words in the English language. I'll get to it eventually. Tonight, we're talking about the other way to live, the way where you stop rehearsing and start rehearsing in motion, where the doing becomes the thinking. Because here's the truth, and I want you to remember this one. You don't think your way into a new life, you act your way into one. So don't think, just do. Let me start here, because I think this is the one truth that changes everything else once you finally accept it. Ideas are cheap. I don't say that to insult your ideas. I say it because it's true, and because the sooner you make peace with it, the sooner you stop waiting for the right one and start building the life you say you want. Think about it honestly. How many people do you know who've had a genuinely good idea? Not a handful, not the lucky few, almost everybody. The guy at the gas station has an idea for a business. Your neighbor has an idea for a book. Your cousin has had the same idea for an app for the last 6 years. I promise you, he still has it sitting right there in his head, exactly where he left it. Ideas are everywhere. They fall out of the sky like rain in April. You don't even have to go looking for them. Sit quietly for 10 minutes, and one will show up uninvited. So if ideas are that common, that easy to come by, why do so few people ever build anything with them? Why does one person turn a simple idea into a business, a book, a movement, a better life, while 10 other people had the exact same thought and did absolutely nothing with it? The answer is not intelligence. I want you to let go of that one right now, because it's been lying to you your whole life. I have met men and women with average grades, no fancy degree, nothing special on paper, who are living extraordinary lives. And I have met brilliant people, people who could out-argue, out-analyze you, outthink you on any subject, who are stuck, not because they lack ideas. They've got file cabinets full of ideas. They're stuck because somewhere along the way, they confused thinking about the idea with doing something about the idea. And those are 2 very different activities, my friends. One of them changes your life. The other one just keeps you company while your life stays exactly the same. Here's what nobody tells you about thinking. It feels like work. It really does. You sit with a notebook, you make a list, you turn the plan over 50 different ways, you imagine every outcome, good and bad, you research it, you read about it, you talk about it over coffee with your friends, and at the end of all that, you feel tired. You feel like you've accomplished something, but you haven't moved an inch. Not 1 inch. You've just been standing in place thinking very hard about moving. I call that motion without movement. It looks like progress. It has the shape of progress. But motion without movement doesn't get you anywhere because the world doesn't pay you for how long you thought about something. The world pays you for what you actually built, shipped, said, started, finished. Execution is the toll booth on the highway to anywhere worth going. You don't get to skip it because you had a really good thought. Now, I'm not telling you thinking is worthless. Don't misunderstand me. A little thinking at the front end to point yourself in a direction, that's useful. That's called aim. But most people don't use thinking to aim. They use thinking to stall. They dress up their fear in a suit and tie and call it due diligence. They call it waiting for the right time. They call it doing more research. And 40 years later, they're still doing research on a decision that should have taken them a weekend. I've watched this play out so many times, I could set my watch by it. Somebody gets an idea, a real one, the kind that gives you a little jolt of excitement in your chest. And what do they do with that jolt? They go tell somebody about it. Then they go look it up online. Then they start a folder for it. Then they buy a book about it. Then they think about buying a course about it. Then, about 8 months later, they see somebody else, somebody with half the talent, half the insight, doing the exact same idea out in the real world, making real money, making real impact. And the first person feels sick to their stomach, not because they weren't smart enough, because they weren't fast enough. The idea wasn't the scarce resource. The willingness to act on it was, you have to understand something about ideas. They have a shelf life. An idea today is worth something. The same idea 6 months from now, after you've thought about it into the ground, after you've talked yourself out of it 4 separate times, that idea is worth close to nothing. Not because the idea changed, because the moment changed, the market changed, your competitors moved, and worst of all, you changed. You talked yourself into being smaller. That's what excessive thinking does when it's unaccompanied by action. It doesn't just delay you, it shrinks you. Every day you sit on a good idea without moving on it, you are quietly negotiating yourself down from the person who could do it to the person who almost did it. I want you to notice something about the people you admire, the ones who built something real. Go back and look at their early days. If you can find the record of it, you will almost never find a person who had the perfect plan before they started. What you'll find is somebody who had a rough idea, a decent enough plan, and the nerve to go test it against reality far sooner than felt comfortable. They executed while the idea was still a little rough around the edges. They executed while they still had doubts. That's the part people don't want to hear because it's much more comfortable to imagine that successful people had it all figured out in advance. They didn't. They just weren't willing to let thinking substitute for doing. Here's a phrase I want you to carry out of this room tonight. A good plan, violently executed today, beats a perfect plan next week. Read that again in your mind. A good plan, not a perfect one, a good one, violently executed, meaning with urgency, with energy, with your whole self behind it. Today beats a perfect plan that you're still polishing next week. Because next week, the perfect plan is still just a plan. And a plan on paper has never built a single thing. Not a house, not a business, not a marriage, not a body, not a bank account. Paper doesn't build anything. Only action builds things. I think part of the problem is we've been taught to worship the idea itself, as if the idea is the hard part. It isn't. Go ask anybody who's actually built something, and they'll tell you the idea was the easy 5 minutes. The hard part was the next 5 years of unglamorous, repetitive, sometimes boring execution, showing up on the days you didn't feel like it, making the call you didn't want to make, fixing the version that didn't work, and trying again. That's not thinking, that's doing. And doing, my friends, is where all the value lives. So let me ask you the question I asked at the very start, but I want you to answer it for real this time. What idea have you been sitting on? Not entertaining, sitting on. Turning it over, protecting it, waiting for the conditions to be perfect, waiting until you feel ready, waiting until you know enough. I want you to notice that ready never actually arrives on its own. Readiness is not a feeling that shows up before you act. Readiness is a byproduct that shows up after you've already started. You don't think your way into confidence, you act your way into it. Execution is not about being fearless. Let's be honest about that too. Everybody who's ever built anything worthwhile was afraid at some point along the way. Execution is not the absence of fear or the absence of doubt. Execution is simply the decision to move forward anyway, with the idea you have right now, imperfect as it is, because you finally understood something important. The idea was never going to become more valuable by staying in your head. It only becomes valuable the moment it leaves your head and enters the world. That's the whole lesson right there. Ideas are cheap because everybody has them. Execution is everything because almost nobody does it. And the space between those two things, that space is exactly where your future is waiting for you to show up. So stop refining the idea. Stop researching the idea. Stop discussing the idea over dinner one more time. Go do something with it. Today, this week, in some small but real way, because a mediocre idea executed will always outperform a brilliant idea that never left the notebook. I want to talk to you now about something a little more uncomfortable than the last point, because this one isn't about strategy. This one is about honesty, the kind of honesty most of us avoid having with ourselves. And it's this: thinking at a certain point stops being preparation and becomes a hiding place. Now, I know that sounds harsh. Thinking is supposed to be the responsible thing, isn't it? We were raised to believe that the careful person thinks things through, and the reckless person just charges ahead. And there's some truth in that early on. But I want you to consider something most people never stop to examine, that thinking has a front door and a back door. The front door is where thinking helps you aim. The back door is where thinking helps you hide. And an awful lot of us have been walking through that back door for years, telling ourselves the whole time that we're still standing at the front. Let me tell you what I mean by hiding. Fear doesn't always show up wearing a scary mask. Most of the time, fear is polite. Fear doesn't announce itself and say, I am afraid, and that is why I am not moving. No, fear is much smarter than that. Fear puts on a lab coat. Fear picks up a clipboard. Fear starts talking about being strategic and not rushing into things and wanting to do it right. Fear becomes very, very reasonable sounding. And that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. Because reasonable sounding fear doesn't feel like fear. It feels like wisdom. It feels like maturity. It feels like the responsible choice. And so we sit with it year after year, congratulating ourselves on our patience, when what we're actually doing is avoiding the risk of finding out whether we could really do the thing. I've sat across the table from so many people who describe themselves as still thinking it over, still weighing the options, still doing their homework. And I've learned to ask a simple, gentle question when I hear that. How long? Not to be unkind, but because the answer tells you everything. If somebody has been still thinking it over for 3 weeks, fine. That's reasonable. That's actual preparation. But if somebody has been thinking it over for 3 years, that's not preparation anymore, friends. That's a hideout. That's a very comfortable, very well-furnished hideout with a nice view, where a person can sit indefinitely and never once have to face the small, terrifying possibility of trying and falling short. See, here's the truth about action that thinking will never give you. Action exposes you. The moment you actually do the thing, make the call, launch the business, ask the question, show up at the gym, submit the manuscript, you open yourself up to a result, a real one. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe people laugh, maybe you fail publicly in front of people who will remember it. That is genuinely uncomfortable, and I'm not going to stand up here and pretend otherwise. Action costs you something up front. Your ego, your comfort, your illusions. Thinking, on the other hand, costs you nothing up front. That's exactly the trap. As long as you're still thinking about it, nobody can tell you that you failed because you haven't tried yet. As long as the business is still in the planning phase, it can't go bankrupt. As long as the book is still in your head, it can't get rejected. As long as the relationship conversation is still something you're working up to, it can't go badly. Thinking, when it's used this way, becomes a kind of insurance policy against the pain of a real outcome, and it feels safe. But I want you to understand what that safety is actually costing you, because it is not free. It's costing you the entire life that was waiting for you on the other side of that action you never took. I've heard people call this analysis paralysis. And that phrase is fine as far as it goes, but I think it's a little too clinical. I prefer to call it what it really is: comfortable cowardice. Now, don't hear me wrong. I'm not calling any person in this room a coward. I'm saying that thinking without acting is a cowardly use of a good mind. It's taking a sharp tool, a mind capable of building something real, and using it instead to build excuses, beautiful excuses, elaborate excuses, excuses with footnotes and spreadsheets and a 5-year projection, but excuses all the same. Here's how you can tell the difference. in your own life between thinking that's preparing you and thinking that's hiding you. Preparation has a deadline. Preparation says, I will think about this until Friday, and on Friday I will decide, and on Monday I will act. Hiding has no deadline. Hiding just says soon, forever. Hiding says when the timing is better, and the timing is never better, because hiding doesn't actually want the timing to arrive. Hiding wants the safety of the waiting room, not the outcome of the appointment. I want to be very direct with you about something. Every single person in this room has at least one thing right now, tonight, that they have been thinking about instead of doing. You know what it is. I'm not going to guess it for you because you already know it better than I do. Maybe it's a business. Maybe it's a conversation you need to have with somebody you love or somebody you need to stop loving. Maybe it's a health decision. Maybe it's walking away from something that stopped being good for you 2 years ago. And I promise you, if you're honest, the thinking stopped being useful a long time back. It has curdled into something else. It's become the comfortable chair you sit in so you don't have to walk into the storm. Now, here's the good news, and I mean this sincerely. The moment you can see the hideout for what it is, you're already halfway out of it. Because hiding only works in the dark. It only works when you can call it something nobler than what it is. The second you say to yourself, honestly, I am not still thinking this over. I am afraid, and I am using thought as a shield. Something shifts. You can't comfortably sit in a hideout once you've turned the light on and looked directly at it. It stops being a strategy and starts looking exactly like what it is. A very long, very expensive delay. I'll tell you something else about hiding behind thought. It doesn't even protect you from the pain you're trying to avoid. That's the cruel joke of it. People think, if I don't try, at least I can't fail. But not trying is its own kind of failure. A quieter one, a slower one. One that doesn't announce itself with a single sharp sting, but instead drips on you for years. A little at a time, every time you see somebody else doing the thing you were still thinking about. That kind of pain doesn't visit you once. It visits you daily for the rest of your life in the form of what if. And I have never, not once, met a person on their deathbed who regretted the actions that didn't work out. I have met plenty who regretted the actions they never took. So here's what I want you to do with this. I want you to go back tonight to that thing you've been still thinking about. And I want you to ask yourself the honest question, is this thinking still serving me, or has it quietly become my shelter? Because if it's shelter, you don't need a better plan. You don't need more information. You have had enough information for a long, long time. What you need is to walk outside. What you need is to let it be uncomfortable, let it be a little scary, and do the thing anyway today in whatever small and imperfect form is available to you right this minute. You were not given a mind so that you could build yourself a comfortable hiding place. You were given a mind to build a life. Use it for that instead. Now let's talk about perfection, because I think perfection has quietly become one of the most expensive words in the English language. Not because wanting to do things well is bad, it isn't. And I'd never stand up here and tell you to do sloppy work. But somewhere along the way, wanting to do it well got twisted into waiting until it's perfect. And those two things are not cousins. They're not even in the same family. One of them builds a life. The other one quietly dismantles one, a day at a time, while convincing you that you're being responsible. Here is the phrase I want you to carry out of this room tonight, and I want you to say it to yourself the next time you catch yourself stalling. A good plan today, violently executed, beats a perfect plan tomorrow. Read it slowly. A good plan, not a flawless one, a good one, a decent one, a plan with some rough edges still showing today, executed with real energy behind it, will always outperform the flawless plan you're still polishing, still refining, still waiting to unveil once every last detail is buttoned up. Because here's the part nobody wants to admit: tomorrow's perfect plan doesn't exist yet. It's not real. It's a plan you're imagining in a future that hasn't arrived. And you cannot build a life or a business or a body or a marriage out of a thing that only exists in your imagination. I want you to think about the word perfect for a second and what it's actually doing when you use it as your standard. Perfect is not a place you arrive at. Perfect is a horizon. And you know what happens when you walk toward a horizon? It moves. Every single time you get close, it steps back exactly as far as you step forward. That's not a metaphor I'm using loosely. That's literally how it works. You get the plan to 90%, and now you can see two more things that could be better, so you chase those. You fix those, and now you notice three more things. This isn't refinement anymore. At that point, it's a treadmill, dressed up to look like a staircase. You feel like you're climbing. You're not. You're just burning calories in place while the actual world moves on without you. Meanwhile, and this is the part that stings a little, so let me say it plainly, while you're perfecting your plan, somebody else is executing their good enough version of the same plan, learning things you can't learn from a desk, adjusting in real time, getting better with every rep. By the time your perfect plan is finally ready to leave the drawer, that other person is 3 versions ahead of you. Not because they were smarter, not because their plan was better than yours on paper. It probably wasn't. It's because their plan met reality months before yours did, and reality is the only teacher that actually knows what it's talking about. Reality doesn't lie to you the way your imagination does. Your imagination is generous. It tells you the plan is almost ready. Reality tells you the truth. Ready or not, here's what actually happens when you try this. I've watched this play out in businesses, in relationships, in health, in every corner of life you can name. The person who says, let me get the website perfect before I launch, watches somebody else launch an ugly website that starts making sales in month 1. The person who says, let me get 20 pounds lighter before I start dating again, spends 2 years in a holding pattern that never quite ends because the goalpost that was supposed to signal ready keeps sliding. The person who says, I'll start the business once I've saved enough to do it right, is still saving 5 years later, and enough has quietly become a number that keeps adjusting itself upward every time they get close. Perfect, my friends, is very often just fear that learned how to wear a tie and carry a briefcase. It looks disciplined from the outside. On the inside, it's the same old fear, just better dressed. Now, I want to be fair to the other side of this because I don't want you leaving here thinking I'm telling you to be careless. There is a difference between a good plan and a reckless plan, and that difference matters. A good plan has done its basic homework. It knows roughly where it's going. It has thought through the big risks, the ones that could actually sink you, and it has some kind of answer for those. That's responsible. That's wise. But a good plan does not need every question answered before it moves. A good plan accepts that some of the answers will only show up once you're already in motion, because some knowledge simply doesn't exist yet at the planning stage. It gets created by the doing. You cannot think your way to information that hasn't been generated yet. You can only act your way to it. This is the part that separates people who build things from people who talk about building things. The first group has made peace with imperfect information. They understand that a plan is not a guarantee. It's a direction. It's a compass, not a map with every inch already surveyed. And a compass is enough to start walking. You adjust as the terrain reveals itself. That's not a failure of planning. That's what planning was always supposed to be before we got scared and started demanding it do something it was never capable of doing, which is remove all risk before we're willing to take a single step. Let me give you the honest math on this, because I think it clarifies things. Say you've got two people. One spends 6 months getting the plan flawless before they launch. The other spends 2 weeks getting a plan that's solid, not flawless, and launches. Now, fast forward 1 year. The person who launched early has had roughly 11 and a half months of real-world contact, real customers, real feedback, real mistakes corrected in real time, real momentum building. The person who waited for perfect has had 6 months of that same contact at best, and probably less, because perfect has a bad habit of quietly stretching its own deadline. Same starting talent, same intelligence, wildly different results. And the entire gap between them came down to one decision, made early. Are we going to demand perfection before we begin? Or are we going to demand competence and then let the beginning teach us the rest? I want you to notice something else too about waiting for perfect. It doesn't just cost you time. It costs you information you can never get back any other way. Every month you spend refining a plan in isolation, away from the real world, is a month you're not collecting the feedback that would actually make the plan better. It's a strange irony, but it's true. The fastest way to a truly excellent plan is not more private polishing. It's earlier public testing. The market will tell you what's wrong with your plan faster and more honestly than your own head ever will, if you'll just let it. But it can only tell you that once you've shown it something. Silence and endless internal revision teaches you nothing. It just feels like it's teaching you something, which is worse because it keeps you busy while keeping you stuck. So here's what I want you to walk away with tonight. Stop asking yourself, is this plan perfect enough to start? That question will never give you a yes, because perfect isn't a real destination. It's a moving target designed by fear to keep you standing still. Ask yourself a different question instead. Is this plan good enough to learn from? That's a question you can actually answer. That's a bar you can actually clear, usually much sooner than you think. And once you clear it, go. Go with the good plan. Go today. Let tomorrow's perfect plan stay exactly where it belongs, in the imagination of people who are still waiting for permission that was never going to arrive. A good plan today, violently executed, beats a perfect plan tomorrow every single time in every single arena of life, because tomorrow's perfect plan never actually shows up to compete. Only today's good plan gets in the ring. I want to talk to you now about momentum, because I think it's the most misunderstood force in personal achievement. People talk about momentum like it's something that happens to you, like luck, like weather, like it either shows up or it doesn't. But momentum isn't weather. Momentum is manufactured. And it's manufactured by exactly one thing: motion. Not thought about motion, not plans for motion. Motion itself. Here's what I mean, and I want you to really sit with this, because it goes against almost everything we've been trained to believe. We've been taught that motivation comes first and then action follows. You wait to feel inspired, you wait to feel ready, you wait for that surge of energy and clarity, and once it arrives, then you act. That sounds reasonable. It's also almost entirely backwards. In my experience, and in the experience of nearly everyone I've ever studied who built something real, motivation doesn't come before action. Motivation comes from action. You don't think your way into feeling motivated. You move your way into it. Think about the last time you really didn't want to do something. Go to the gym, start a hard project, make a difficult phone call. What did it feel like in the moment right before you started? Heavy, right? Resistant. Your mind offering you 17 good reasons to do it later. But then think about what happened once you actually began. Once your hand was already dialing the number, once you were already lacing up your shoes, once you'd already opened the document and typed the first sentence, something shifted. The resistance that felt like a wall from a distance turned out to be more like a door that opens the moment you actually push on it. That's not a coincidence, and it's not just in your head. That's the basic mechanics of momentum. It doesn't wait for you at the starting line, cheering you on before you've moved. It meets you a few steps in. You have to walk toward it before it'll walk toward you. This is why so many people stay stuck, even brilliant, capable people. They're waiting for a feeling that only shows up after the thing they're waiting to feel motivated to do. It's like standing in a cold room, waiting to feel warm before you'll put on a coat. The coat is what makes you warm. The action is what makes you motivated. You've got it backwards, and until you flip it around, you'll wait your whole life for a green light that was actually depending on you to start driving first. Now, here's where thought comes into this, because I'm not against thinking. I've said that before, and I'll say it again. But I want you to understand what thinking can and cannot do for you when it comes to momentum. Thinking can point you in a direction. It can tell you which way is probably north. That's valuable. Don't misunderstand me. But thinking cannot generate the force that actually gets you moving in that direction. That force only comes from movement itself. You can think about running a mile for 3 hours, and at the end of 3 hours, you will not be one step closer to having run it. But if you lace up your shoes and jog to the end of your driveway, poorly, awkwardly, out of breath, in 30 seconds. Congratulations. You now have more momentum toward that mile than 3 hours of thinking ever could have given you. Because momentum isn't stored in the mind. It's stored in the body, in the habit, in the doing. I've watched this happen so many times with people trying to change their lives. They'll come to me with an enormous plan. I'm going to overhaul my entire diet, restructure my whole business, rewrite my whole life starting Monday. And they'll spend the whole weekend thinking about it, mapping it out, getting the plan just right. And Monday comes, and the size of the plan is so large, so heavy, that it becomes its own obstacle. The thinking that was supposed to prepare them instead paralyzed them, because a plan that big can only be approached by thought. You can't just casually start executing an entire life overhaul. So they sit with it. And sitting with it produces nothing. Because sitting with something, no matter how long, does not create motion. Only motion creates motion. Contrast that with the person who does something small, almost embarrassingly small, on day one. Not the whole overhaul, just one rep, one page written, one healthy meal, one outreach call. It looks unimpressive. It looks like it barely counts. But here's the secret nobody tells you. That one small action does something the 3 hours of planning never could. It proves to you physically, in your own body, in your own experience, that you are the kind of person who does the thing. And once you've proven that to yourself, once, the next rep is a little easier to start. Not because you thought harder about it, because you have real physical evidence now. Evidence your mind cannot argue with the way it can argue with a plan on paper. You can talk yourself out of a plan. It's much harder to talk yourself out of something you've already started doing. This is why momentum compounds the way it does. And I do mean compounds the same way money compounds, the same way interest compounds. The first action is the hardest and produces the least visible result. But it changes the conditions for the second action, which becomes slightly easier and produces a little more result and changes the conditions for the third. None of that compounding happens in the thinking phase. You can think the same good thought 10,000 times, and it will still be worth exactly what it was worth the first time. Nothing until it's acted on. But you take the same small action 10 times, and it is not worth 10 times as much. It's worth far more than that, because each repetition is building on a foundation the previous one laid down. That's what momentum actually is. It's not a feeling. It's compounded motion. I also want you to notice something about people who seem to have all the energy in the world. We look at them and think they must have been born with some special reserve of motivation the rest of us don't have access to. I don't believe that, not for a second. What they have is a habit of moving first and feeling later. They don't wait around for the mood to strike. They've learned, probably the hard way, that the mood is downstream of the movement, not upstream of it. So they move tired, uncertain, sometimes not even wanting to, and the motion itself generates the energy that everybody else is out there waiting to feel before they'll even start. There's a practical implication here I want to leave you with, because I don't want this to just be a nice idea you nod along to and then forget by the parking lot. The next time you find yourself stuck, genuinely stuck, staring at something you know you should be doing, but can't seem to start. Stop trying to think your way out of it. That's the trap. That's exactly the wrong tool for this particular job. Thinking got you the direction. It cannot get you the momentum. Instead, ask yourself one question. What is the smallest possible physical action I could take on this in the next 5 minutes? Not the whole plan, not the impressive version, the smallest real action available to you. And then go do that one thing, even if it feels almost too small to matter. Because here's what you'll find every single time, without exception. The small action, however unimpressive it looks from the outside, is worth more than another hour of thought, because it's the only one of the two that actually moves the flywheel. And once that flywheel starts turning, even just a little, it becomes measurably easier to turn it again. That is momentum. It is not given to you. It is not felt into existence. It is built one small motion at a time by people who finally stopped waiting to feel ready and simply started before they did. Motion creates momentum. Thought on its own, no matter how brilliant, creates nothing but the illusion of progress. So the next time you're stuck, don't think harder. Move smaller and move now. I want to close with the one that ties everything else together, because in a way, this is the sentence the entire evening has been building toward. You do not think your way into a new life. You act your way into one. Say that quietly to yourself a few times, because I promise you, it will outlast almost everything else I say tonight. We live in a culture that is absolutely in love with the inner life. Get your mindset right. Visualize the outcome. Believe it before you see it. Affirm it. Journal about it. Meditate on it. And look, I'm not here to tear any of that down completely, because there's a piece of truth buried in all of it. Your inner world does matter. What you believe about yourself does shape what you're willing to attempt. But somewhere along the way, we took a small, useful truth and blew it up into something it was never meant to be. We started acting as if the inner work was the whole job, as if enough visualizing, enough affirming, enough believing would eventually just deposit a new life on your doorstep, fully formed, without you ever having to walk out into the weather and build it with your own two hands. I want to tell you plainly, that's not how it works. And deep down, you already know it isn't. You know because you've tried it. You've had seasons where you did all the inner work. You got the mindset right. You said the affirmations. You really did believe, and the life outside your head stayed exactly the same, because belief on its own moves nothing. Belief is not a lever connected to the physical world. Action is the lever. Belief just determines whether you're willing to pull it. Here's the truth about a new life. The kind people say they want, when they say they want to change, it is not a feeling you arrive at. It is not a mental state you unlock. A new life is a different set of actions, repeated consistently over enough time that they produce different results than your old actions did. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. There's no shortcut around it, no matter how appealing the shortcut sounds. If you want a different body, it will be built by different actions taken with your body, not by different thoughts thought about your body. If you want a different income, it will be built by different actions taken with your time and your skills, not by different beliefs held about money. If you want a different relationship, a different reputation, a different level of peace in your life, all of it, every single bit of it, gets built the same way. Action repeated over time. Thought can point toward it. Thought cannot build it. I say this to you with real affection because I don't think most people are lazy. I think most people are misinformed. They've been told sincerely by people who meant well that the work happens on the inside first and the outside will simply follow. And so they pour enormous energy into the inside, genuinely enormous energy, more energy some weeks than the action itself would have required. And they wonder honestly and painfully why the outside of their life still looks the way it did a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's not because they didn't believe hard enough. It's because belief was never going to be sufficient on its own. It was only ever supposed to be the ignition. You still have to drive the car. I want you to think about the people whose lives you actually admire, not the ones who talk about change, the ones who've actually made it. Go back far enough in their story, and I promise you, you will find a period where their outer actions had already started changing before their inner confidence had fully caught up. They didn't wait to feel like an entrepreneur before they started the business. They started the business badly, uncertainly, and the feeling of being an entrepreneur showed up somewhere in month 8, built entirely out of the evidence their own actions had accumulated. They didn't wait to feel like a healthy person before they changed how they ate and moved. They changed how they ate and moved. And somewhere in there, without announcement, they became a healthy person, and the identity followed the action, not the other way around. This is the part I most want you to leave with tonight, because I think it's genuinely freeing once you accept it. You do not need to fix your mindset before you're allowed to start. That belief that you have to become a different person on the inside before you're permitted to act differently on the outside is one of the most quietly destructive ideas circulating today, because it puts the starting line somewhere you can never quite reach. You can always find another layer of belief to work on, another block to clear, another bit of self-doubt to dissolve before you finally feel ready. That process left to itself has no natural end, but action has an immediate one. You can start today. Not the healed version of you, not the confident version, not the fully figured out version, the version sitting in this room tonight, exactly as uncertain and imperfect as you actually are. And here's the part that I find almost miraculous after all these years of watching it happen in other people's lives and in my own. The identity you were waiting to feel before you'd act, it comes anyway. It just comes on the other side of the action instead of the front side of it. You don't think your way into becoming a disciplined person and then start showing up disciplined. You show up messily, inconsistently at first, and the discipline accumulates behind you, action by action, until one day you look back and realize you have become exactly the person you used to only think about becoming. The becoming was never a prerequisite for the doing. The becoming was the result of it. So as you leave here tonight, I don't want you to leave with a better thought. You've had good thoughts before. So have I. Thoughts are not in short supply in this room, and they were never going to be the missing ingredient. What's been missing for most of us, most of the time, is the willingness to let an imperfect action go out into the world before we felt fully ready to send it. So my charge to you is simple, and it's the same one we started with, and it's the one I want ringing in your ears as you walk out that door. Don't think. Just do, not recklessly, not carelessly, but decisively today with what you have as you are right now. Because the new life you've been thinking about for however many months or years you've been thinking about it is not waiting for one more good thought from you. It's waiting for your first real action. Go give it one.